Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. This is Melody Jones with Vantage Point MBA Admissions Consulting. I want to thank our friends at GMAT for inviting me back and having me talk about what I will call every applicant's worst case scenario, and that's rejection. But don't worry, I have good news for you. Yes, it is possible to bounce back and reapply stronger, and I will be showing you how today. So did you know that 10% of HBS's class every year is comprised of reapplicants? That's more than 90 students every year who came back to the application process for the second time, maybe even the third time. So acceptance after rejection is absolutely possible, but how do you assess what went wrong and which areas should you really be improving when you reapply? And that's what we're going to find out today. So in the next 30 minutes, give or take, I'm going to show you how to strategically handle the rejection and then turn the setback into a powerful comeback. But I'm not only sharing advice. In this session, I'm also going to walk you through 2 real case studies of our clients who are in the same situation as you, but they treated the rejection as an opportunity to try again, and they were successful the second time around. So just remember that MBA admissions is competitive, but what you do next makes all the difference. So what are we going to cover today? So number 1 is we're going to acknowledge the rejection, and we're going to hopefully reframe that rejection into something positive and something that gives you a sense of power in the situation. Secondly, I want to leave you with tangible actions that you can take starting today to help strengthen your profile if you've decided that reapplying is right for you. Next, like I said, case studies, right? Let's see how this advice that I'm going to share with you has played out and come into fruition with real live applicants who are successful in the process the second time around. And lastly, I hope that you walk away with real confidence in taking your next steps. So whether that's reapplying or something else, I want you to have a clear action plan and clarity on what's right for you and confidence that you have what it takes to do that. So I always like to break things down into a clear framework. And so what I've identified, and this is the process that our clients go through when they work with us as reapplicants, into really 4 key steps for reapplicant success. So step 1, process the rejection, right? This might seem obvious, but it can be really easy to just brush it aside and act like everything's okay, right? But it's not. It is okay to be disappointed. It is okay to take a beat and sit with a disappointment and honestly feel a little bit sorry for yourself if you need to, right? Take that time and don't just jump right into action, because sometimes frantic action can work against you. And on the same vein, if you don't acknowledge the disappointment and the rejection, it can rear its ugly head later on, right? In the form of self-doubt or even self-sabotage, as you start wondering, like, am I just wasting my time by trying this all over again? So take the time to process it and to come back on the other side with more clarity, and just know that a no now doesn't always mean a no forever. It's just a not yet, a not right now. You're not ready. There might be some other steps you need to take until it's the right time. So trust the process, get comfortable, right, with this discomfort of rejection, and really use that to fuel you in your next steps. So after that, it is time to step into action, right? And so before you can do that, step 2 is to diagnose what went wrong. You need to know what went wrong so that you can take clear, measured, and purposeful steps towards improving it and towards actually making a difference in your application when you reapply. So there are a couple different ways that you can go about diagnosing your prior applications. Some schools are kind enough to actually offer to give you feedback. That is not the case at all programs, but particularly if you made it through the interview phase, some programs, like I know Yale does this, I believe Tuck does this as well, will give you the opportunity to get real feedback from the admissions committee. If that's in play for you and that's on the table, definitely take them up on it. They might not always tell you anything, that was new or unheard of, but it could, if anything, help reaffirm some doubts that you had in the back of your mind. The second step is to conduct your own self-assessment of each component of your application to understand what went wrong. And in the following slides, I'm going to give you some more detailed steps on how to do this systematically. But really go through each part of your application and say, okay, where did I maybe not measure up versus class profiles, but also where could I have been stronger and where did I maybe not do my own profile and story justice? And then lastly is also take advantage of expert feedback. If you worked with a consultant, leverage them to perhaps get feedback from another member of their team who didn't work with you as closely. Or if you didn't work with a consultant, now is a great time to consider engaging expert help and get a really important third-party, unbiased perspective on your application that might shed light on blind spots that you didn't even know you had, or can certainly help give you reassurance and clarity on, again, some of those doubts or lingering feelings that you might have had in your prior application that you can get some more certainty around. So let's go back to that self-assessment I just talked about, right? Because no matter what, whether you get a consultant feedback or even if you get feedback from a particular school's admissions committee, you also want to do your own self-assessment, right? To really make sure that if you decide to reapply, you are absolutely putting your own best foot forward. So there are different areas, sort of hunting grounds across your applications that you'll want to start looking. And number one is test scores, right? That's super obvious, super measurable, right? If your test score, if your GMAT or your GRE fell below the average for the schools that you applied to, it's a great time to say, okay, maybe I need to retake this test. Maybe I need to pivot from the GRE to the GMAT or vice versa. And really think and sit down and ask yourself, what is it going to take for me to improve on those test scores? Secondly is academic ability, right? Similar to test scores, academic ability is fairly objective, right? You can see if your GPA fell short of the class profiles. You can also see if there were some other more qualitative factors about your academic profile that maybe didn't quite stack up. Maybe you did not have a quantitatively rigorous undergraduate education. Maybe you didn't take any business classes or even any heavy math classes like statistics or calculus or something like that. So maybe that's an area that the admissions committee had doubt about. Another component of your application, and this is a big one that we see for reapplicants, and that's career goals. And I will say career goals are in 2025 and this upcoming application cycle are going to be more important than ever, just given what's going on with the larger hiring trends and macroeconomic environment. So career goals are critical, and it's not just enough to have them. Yes, you need to have clear and defined goals, but they also need to be realistic and achievable and make the case for the MBA and be connected to your past experience. So there's a lot of boxes you want to check when it comes down to creating and defining and, of course, then conveying clear and strong career goals. So if that's an area where you might have been lacking, the good news is there are absolutely things you can do to strengthen that. Work experience is another one, right? We all know that the top MBA programs on the whole have an average of 5 years of work experience. Now that is an average. And so that doesn't mean that you won't get accepted if you have 6 years or if you have 4 years, right? Not at all. But that average is the peak of the bell curve. But what you do want to think about is outside of years of work experience, if you are more than 1 or 2 years outside of that average number, does the quality of your work experience also compete with folks who might have a few more years of experience than you? Or on the flip side, if you bring more experience to the table, did you make a case for why the MBA was right for you now? Why this degree was still right for you given your post-MBA goals? So that's an area to look at as well in terms of how you stack up to the competition. Another area where we see applicants fall short, and this one is a little bit more nebulous, and that's just around a cohesive narrative. Did you connect all the dots across your application? Did you answer any questions that might be raised by looking through your application answers, your transcripts, your essays, your resume, your letters of recommendation, right? Everything that the AdCom has to assess your profile. Again, did you connect the dots between your career goals and your past experience and why you're seeking an MBA, right? Did everything fit together and make sense? Next is interview performance. When you get to the interview stage, and most schools do have invite-only interview processes. And so once you make it to the interview, you've made a huge leap in that funnel, right? Typical acceptance rates post-interview are around 50% for most of the top programs. But that doesn't mean that you can't still shoot yourself in the foot in the interview. And with HBS in particular, we've seen the interview to be a huge sort of pitfall for applicants and a reason why they maybe ended up in that reject pile over acceptance post-interview. So again, think back to your interview and assess whether or not there were instances where you could have answered a question more directly, or you could have provided maybe a better answer or shared a better story to some of those tell me about a time questions. So again, as you go down the reapplication path, make sure that you're focusing on the interview as well and not just the written components of your application. And lastly, overall fit, right? Again, this is something that all schools care about. Some schools are really excited and look to see more sort of hands-on engagement with their community as part of assessing your overall application profile. But no matter whether you visited campus 5 times or you haven't been able to actually go there in person, but you've engaged with members of the community virtually or through phone calls or through meetings in your home city, et cetera, being able to articulate your fit for that program is critical, whether or not the essay question asks why our school. And so if you maybe didn't articulate that as clearly or as personally as you could have, that's another area to identify and think about what action steps you can take next in order to clarify that fit, particularly for schools that are kind of your top choice and your dream schools, and you definitely want to reapply and give it another shot. Fit is a great area where you can take clear and fairly easy steps to help strengthen that aspect of your application. So before we move into step 3, I just want to take a pause quickly and tell you a little bit more about myself and my team. Because there's a reason why we're here presenting this content to you. And of course, everything that we've shared is really built upon the richness and depth of our experience. But who are we? Who is my team? Like I said, I'm the founder and president of Vantage Point MBA Admissions Consulting, but I have an amazing team of 25 active admissions consultants that work with our clients and that keep me on my toes every single day. What does that look like? That means we have advised over 1,000 applicants over the last 9 years. We've seen quite a bit of changes and cyclicality in the MBA admissions process. But again, that experience and that depth of perspective is what enables us to guide and coach our clients and be the expert that they can holistically rely on as part of their application process. But of course, there are a lot of admissions consulting firms out there. So what makes us different? And the way that I like to phrase it to folks who ask me this question is, I think of us as the Goldilocks of admissions consulting firms. So what do I mean by that? I mean that in terms of size, we have the resources and the depth and breadth of experience of a large firm, but we have the attention and the care and the personalized approach and truly the client service obsession of a boutique firm. And so that's really the beauty of working with a team like ours, is you get the best of all worlds. Our team focuses almost exclusively on the top 10 MBA programs with, I would say, special emphasis on the M7. That's something that has just evolved over the years, given who our clients are and clients that hire us to help them through the application process. So we're really proud to have built out that expertise. And what does this all mean for you? It means results. It means that our clients are accepted to the top MBA programs, right? Those top 10 I just told you about, at 3 times higher acceptance rates than the average acceptance rates. So if you want to boost your chances and you want to give yourself the best possible shot at acceptance, You have the data right here. But really what drives us, what drives our entire team, and what unites us, no matter what walk of life or pathway that we're on, is truly an obsession and a mission to transform the lives of you all, of young professionals, through getting accepted to a top MBA program. For us, for me in particular, an MBA was such a transformational experience, both personally and professionally, and nothing brings us more joy than enabling that for so many others. So if you're facing rejection in particular, I just want to spend a minute. Oh, look at that typo. Sorry about that, guys. I'm supposed to say analysis. But I just want to quickly share an option for you to get that expert feedback on your application. So we do offer we call it the Repack, a rejected application analysis for $725. This will be done with a member of our team who's either a former admissions director or a school specialist in the school that you'll be sharing with us. And it's an opportunity to get that diagnosis that we talked about, and most importantly, get recommendations for action steps that you can take to help strengthen your profile. So if you're interested, you can follow the link on the slide here, and I believe it's also in the description of the session today. So let's jump back into it. What is step 3, right? So far you've gotten comfortable with the disappointment and you have diagnosed what went wrong. Now it's really time for the rubber to meet the road. So how do you strengthen your profile? And so I've organized these along the same lines of the items that we just shared previously with the self-diagnosis. So starting with test scores, because I think that's always the first place that people go. And again, it's the most objective, and it's often one of sort of the longest timeline improvements that you can make, right? Especially if you need to improve your GMAT score by 10, 20, 30, maybe 40 points, and you haven't studied for the GMAT in a while, it's going to take some time to relearn the material again, get your test scheduled, and really move the needle there. That said, retake the test if that's an area that you fall short in relative to the class profiles of the schools that you're applying to. Now, obviously, in an ideal world, you will improve your score, right? But it's not always necessary. I'm actually going to show you this in one of the case studies. Sometimes you have to try, but sometimes trying and showing that you gave it another shot, maybe you gave it another 2 shots and you just couldn't get there, demonstrating that commitment and really that willingness to do whatever it takes does make a difference to the admissions committee. And if you're able to strengthen other areas of your application as well, it could be enough to get them to give you a pass the second time around. So definitely retake it. If you took the GMAT, for example, the first time around, and maybe you want to give the GRE a shot the second time around, that is fine. Switch tests, see where you score the highest, use the percentiles as a good sort of baseline to understand where you're scoring the highest, and then follow the path that's going to ultimately give you the most improvement from your prior score. Secondly is academic ability, right? We talked about that earlier. It can come in the form of a low GPA, maybe a lack of quantitative background. Maybe you had some low grades in particular in some quantitatively oriented classes. Again, this is a great opportunity to, yes, address it with a higher test score, hopefully, but also to enroll in an additional course if you're not able to bring up your test score, or if that's just never going to be kind of the strength of your application. There are different classes you can enroll in, different levels of commitment and cost, of course, and time investment. But if you're able to enrolling an additional course, and most importantly, getting that A or that 100% or whatever the grading scale is really important to add an additional data point to your application profile and to that academic profile. Career goals are next, right? We talked about the importance of having clearly defined career goals that are realistic, that make sense for you, that make sense for this MBA program. And career goals really are broken down between short-term and long-term. So short-term is what you want to do immediately after business school, but you can't forget the long-term as well, right? If you focus only on short-term, you risk positioning the MBA as just a really expensive job placement service, right? And in reality, the MBA is a degree with lifelong returns. And so really thinking about how the MBA is going to empower you, not just 1 or 2 years after graduation, but long-term is an important part of your career goals narrative. So if this is an area where maybe you fell short in your prior application, now is a great time to sit back and say, okay, where are the blanks that I need to fill in? And who do I need to have conversations with in order to help me fill in those blanks and gain more understanding of what this career path looks like, or what really is realistic, or what are some of the common threads that I can find between my past experience and my goals, especially if I'm looking to make more of a career pivot or change from the path that you've been on so far. The next is work experience, right? We talked about years of work experience earlier, and do you fall short, or maybe you have higher years of work experience versus the class average. But also look at the quality of your work experience, right? If work experience is right kind of in that sweet spot, maybe you applied with 3 years of experience last time, and if you reapply again, you have 4 years of experience. But really try to be cognizant and deliberate about seeking sort of reach or stretch or leadership experiences at work. Start there, right? If maybe you haven't been formally promoted yet in your role, but you have the opportunity to, raise your hand and maybe pilot a new process or technology that your group is considering adopting, and you can kind of lead the charge there, right? That's leadership. And so think about sort of non-formal ways that you can build up that part of your profile and then bring that stronger sort of perspective and experience to the table as a reapplicant. If work is not an option for you, don't discount outside of work as well, right? Extracurriculars are a great place to gain leadership experience. And if you are a younger applicant, but you have tremendous leadership experience outside of work, whether it's through a community organization you're involved in or something from undergrad that you've carried forward into your professional life, again, those are all areas where you can, again, step up, demonstrate that leadership, and showcase that maturity and quality of experience that MBA programs are looking for. Community involvement, right? I just touched on this. Community involvement is great to showcase leadership experience, but it's also a great predictor of how you're going to show up in an MBA community, right? The impact you're going to have once you are a student on campus. What role will you play, or what cause are you passionate about that you might try to rally your classmates into getting involved with alongside you? So community involvement, yes, is great to showcase leadership and to showcase your ability to deliver results, but it's also great to showcase your character and your humanity, right? What you care about and the things you do outside of work really help paint that colorful picture of who you are as a human. And that's something that business schools do care about deeply. Cohesive narrative is another one that is harder to kind of put your finger on, but it's so, so, so important in a compelling application. Sorry about that. To make sure that you've connected all the dots, you've answered all of the questions that might be on someone's mind as they're reading through your application. So this, again, is where it pays off to start early, so you can always come back to things with a fresh eye and fresh perspective and say, okay, does this make sense? This is also where engaging the help of an expert, of a consultant, or even a friend who's been through the application process before to help just give you that gut check and to hold up that mirror that's really hard to do for yourself. Interview performance is a big one, like I mentioned earlier. So do not discount the importance of the interview. And if this is an area you think you fell short the second time around, please, please, please invest in interview preparation. Practice. Do not memorize, but practice. Prepare answering questions on your toes. Prepare oddball questions out of left field. And most certainly prepare answers to the questions that you know are the common heavy hitters at the schools that you will be interviewing with. So do your research. Read Clear Admit has really great past interview reports that I always point my clients to. That's a great place to get started. And then make sure that you're really nailing that interview through doing mock live interviews with a consultant or a friend to really help you nail down that part of the process. And lastly, school fit. School fit is really important to all programs, but particularly to some in particular, like Kellogg, Columbia, Tuck, just to name a few. Really want to understand how you are a fit for the distinctive components of their community. And the best way for you to understand that for yourself is research, but also investing real time. So visit campus if you at all can. Connect with alumni and current students and have multiple conversations. Yes, speaking with one person is better than zero, but speaking with 5 people is even better because you'll start to sense what are kind of the common repeated themes, but you'll also get a sense for what different experiences people had and what stood out to them versus what stood out to someone else. Conversations with current students in particular are also great places to learn more about organizations or classes or travel opportunities that maybe just have a few sentences listed on the website, but you can really learn about what they're truly like. And then in your essays, connect the dots between what those experiences will impart to you and what you need to get out of an MBA, or what insights you've had from your past career, and how the two will come together to help further and empower your post-MBA goals. So again, those conversations enrich you and help you solidify in your mind the reasoning for why you want to go to that school, but it also will ultimately help you write better essays, more personalized and tailored essays that show the depth of your research, and ultimately help you perform better in that interview when you're asked to talk about why that school and why MBA. All right, so to recap, so far you've gotten comfortable with the disappointment, you've diagnosed what went wrong, and now you have a bunch of clear action steps you can take to help address those different parts of your application that may need to be strengthened. So how do you bring it all together, right? Most schools, although not all, but most schools will have you write a reapplicant essay. So in some cases, this is in addition to the required essays you might have written the last time around. But in some cases, like in the case of Columbia, for example, they don't have you rewrite the past essays. They have you simply write a reapplicant essay that is typically focused on essentially what's changed or how have you strengthened your application since you last applied. So no matter which sort of requirements you fall into, depending on the schools that you're reapplying to, the reapplicant essay is key. And you want to focus on what's changed, but most importantly, on what steps you've taken to make improvements, right? So if you took an additional class, talk about it. If you were promoted at work and you had, a tremendous sort of challenging leadership experience that taught you something new, talk about that. If you visited campus 5 times and gained further clarity into how that program is the right fit for you, talk about that, right? So this is really where you bring forward all of those action steps we talked about in step 3, and then use those to market yourself to the admissions committee and really plead your case. I think it's helpful, and I've seen this done very well in most of our clients' reapplicant essays, to acknowledge the rejection, right? Acknowledge sort of the past no that you received and how that reinforced and renewed your commitment to that program. How it gave you more clarity into why you want an MBA and what you needed to do in order to make yourself ready for that next step. So that self-awareness can really go a long way. And of course, any lessons that you learned, right? Maybe it was a lesson in humility, or it was a lesson in really getting clear to yourself and in consequence in your application materials about why you want this degree, about why this is the right next step for you, about why those goals are really what you want to dedicate the next 5, 10 plus years of your career to. So again, being genuine, honest, but showing real change and real genuine action steps is the key to a successful reapplicant essay. And then lastly, tailoring your strategy, right? How do you come back to the reapplication process and make sure that your overall reapplication strategy is maximizing your chances of success, right? And so usually when we work with reapplicants, we recommend doing a combination of reapplying to schools that you applied to last round, particularly those ones that are your dream schools, or that you absolutely won't sleep well at night if you aren't accepted to. So considering a mix is really helpful. Number 2, most programs as a reapplicant will ask you to submit a new letter of recommendation. Choose your recommenders wisely, right? If you think that your recommenders may have been a weak point in your past application, how can you bring a new perspective to the table? Or how can you nurture a new relationship between now and when you'd submit your new application in order to bring that fresh perspective to your application process as a strength and as something new and additive, right? And so recommenders are a little bit trickier because you have less control over what they write about, but choosing recommenders who will help strengthen your case and potentially reinforce some of the areas that you've personally worked on strengthening over the past month or year that you spent as a reapplicant is only going to help bring together that cohesive narrative we talked about. And then lastly, don't be afraid to change your application angle. And so what do I mean by this? And there's two sides to this coin. So I'll start with the first one and I'll explain what I mean about the second side of the coin, right? So I think sometimes it can feel a little scary to go back to the reapplication process and change things, right? Change your career goals, change your story, change, you name it, right? So if you do change, it is okay. It is okay to say, you know what, I hadn't thought about these goals clearly, or maybe I needed to be more specific about how they connect and really offer that explanation because it's not obvious to someone just reading this as an outside perspective. So again, don't be afraid of change, but you do need to document and explain that change. The admissions committee can and will look at your prior application. So if last year you wanted to found a nonprofit and this year you want to go into investment banking, that's going to be a really tough change to sell, right? You're going to have to really go through some mental gymnastics there to explain that one logically, particularly if it was a short period of time between reapplications. So you want to change, and don't be afraid of that change. But the flip side of the coin is do not try to change everything or attempt drastic changes that are going to cause you to completely go back to square one on everything in your application, because that is not going to look favorably upon you as well. Because either you're going to give the impression that you just have no idea what you want to do and you're just kind of trying different shoes on to see what fits, or you're going to give the impression that you didn't really give the application process any real thought or effort last time around. And that also doesn't reflect well on your character and on your respect for the admissions process. So don't shy away from change. Most reapplicants do change something in their reapplication, but just be wary of sort of dramatic changes that are going to raise more questions than fix problems. All right, so I have a bonus step 4 here. And the reason for this is because everything in this application, or in this presentation, has been tailored towards the decision to reapply, right? That you applied, you got a no, and you decided to, okay, I'm going to give this another shot. But another catalyst that getting rejected can do for folks, and has done for many folks in the past, is to actually cause you to rethink whether or not the MBA is the right path for you. Given my goals, do I really need an MBA, right? Maybe this no was a favor to make me rethink whether or not this degree and this next step was right for me, right? I mean, let's be honest. Plenty of successful leaders in business have achieved their success without an MBA. So be honest with yourself and think about whether or not there are alternative routes to getting to where you want to go. Right? Are there specialized certifications that you can pursue that will give you the knowledge and the credentials and the credibility that you need to achieve your goals? Are there leadership programs that you can apply to within your company, within your corporation, that could help give you some of that training and leadership practice that you are looking to an MBA to gain? Or are there industry-specific trainings that you could sign up for that, again, would help advance your progression in your path and give you the skills and knowledge that you need without committing to the 2 years of a full-time MBA program? Similarly, maybe you can just maximize on-the-job learning, and with a little bit of patience and the right mentors and advocates and networking across your organization, you can still achieve the goals that you are endeavoring to achieve. Right? Maybe the MBA is a nice to have, but not a need to have. And ultimately, it's just about redefining what success looks like for you. So if success does look like I need and want an MBA, this is something I've always wanted, this has always been part of my plan, and I know exactly why and how it fits in, then by all means, reapplying is absolutely the path for you. But in other cases, if you are asking yourself, you know what, I don't really know if this is something that I want now, or maybe I've just been so stuck in this process for so long that I just didn't want to give up, right? I didn't want to admit failure. I didn't want to admit that maybe I was knocking on the wrong door. So again, think about what success looks like for you. If there are alternative paths to getting where you want to go without the MBA that you would be happy and satisfied with. And if so, go for it. There's no shame. All right, time for the case studies. So this is where I'm going to walk you through two different client examples where they came to us as reapplicants. So both of these clients did not work with us on their original applications, but they were not successful the first time around and came back to us to work on their applications. So I'll walk you through sort of what that original application looked like, and then talk you through the changes we made as a reapplicant and their ultimate outcomes. So let's start with Andrew. So Andrew's profile is as follows. He had a 3.5 GPA from a UC school, so not Berkeley or UCLA, but a reputable UC school. A 710 GMAT, so a tad on the low side for the M7s, which he was applying to. He had 6 years of work experience in investment management in New York City at a well-known asset manager. And his post-MBA goals were in ESG investing, so environmental, social, and governance, which was something that his employer was sort of making a foray into, and he really wanted to lean into it for his career full-time. And that was his story in his past application. So he applied to Columbia, Booth, and Wharton, like I said, M7s, and was rejected without interview at all 3 from his original application. Like I said, his GMAT was definitely on the low side for those programs, given sort of someone who's coming from a finance background, 6 years of experience. His career goals lacked a compelling why. And so his career goals were connected to what he was doing professionally, but he didn't really have a strong reason why that was something that he wanted to navigate his career towards beyond just kind of seeming like he was jumping on a trend or on a bandwagon at the time. And so that case was not made in a compelling way in his prior applications. His career goals also didn't make the case for the MBA, really, right? He was already working in asset management. He already had done some work for his fund's launch of a new ESG fund. So he had a little bit of experience already, right? So why not just make that shift internally, right? And keep going. And then lastly, his essays really did not attempt to convey cultural fit, right? Each of those programs, Columbia, Booth, Wharton, all have very distinct cultures and all have very distinct aspects of their profile that set them apart from each other, but that also make a really strong case for Andrew and for his goals and for what he wanted to do. But he just didn't connect those dots effectively in his prior application. So what do we do about it? First, of course, I recommended he retake the GMAT, and he did so 2 times. But unfortunately, he wasn't able to bring up his score. So as a reapplicant, he was back at it with a 710. In the reapplicant essay, he had recently just been between his 2 applications, he was promoted. And right after being promoted, his boss left. And he all of a sudden had to de facto step into his boss's shoes and manage his team while they brought in a replacement. And so that was an extremely challenging time for him. He hadn't had people leadership experience before, but he really was able to rise to the occasion and do an exemplary job of readying the group for a new leader that was hired in externally to come in and hit the ground running. So again, he shared that story in his reapplicant essay and admitted the struggles, but talked about what he learned. And most importantly, how that would enrich the perspective that he would share with his classmates in the classroom. He clarified and expanded his career goals. He really made the argument for why MBA, but also clarified why these career goals were right for him and what that longer term trajectory looked like that was truly inspiring and ambitious. really helped the admissions committee get on board with what he was trying to do. And again, giving them an understanding of how the MBA will propel him on that trajectory. As a New Yorker, reapplying to Columbia, he had no excuse not to engage with the community, right, and visit. And so I believe he visited campus 3 or 4 times for different events, and really went out of his way to connect with members of the community and really learn more about the program, and wrote about those insights in his reapplicant essay to really give the sense that he was deeply, deeply committed to the program, and really understood everything about what it was going to be like and how it was going to support him on his journey. And then lastly, after a lot of back and forth, we actually decided to pivot his application to the J term. So Columbia was his top choice. He really only wanted to reapply to Columbia, but pivoting to the J term made sense because it would enable him to still graduate in that same timeline. But it was also he had a strong case for the J term, because he didn't necessarily need that internship, right? He was looking to stay within the world of asset management, which is where he had previously been working. He had a deep and extensive network across the industry. He did not feel like the internship would be a requirement to break into something new. And so the J term made a lot of sense, because for those of you who don't know, the January term at Columbia Business School basically cuts out the summer internship. So you have 4 semesters of school back to back. So the same 4 semesters you have as a full-time August entry student, but you just cut out that summer internship. So good news, Andrew was accepted to Columbia. Yay, he was thrilled. And ultimately all of the different steps that we took were exactly what he needed to move the needle, even though he did not end up bringing his GMAT score up. Let me give you another one. So this case study is about Rohan. And by the way, client names have been changed just to protect their privacy. So Rohan had a 7.2 CGPA from an IIT institution in India. He had a 750 GMAT. So very good. He also was a little bit older in the application process. So in his original application, he had 6 years, in his reapplication, he had 6 years of work experience across different supply chain and operations roles for 2 different food-related startups in India. So tremendous leadership experience just due to the startup environment. Teams are lean and people are promoted quickly. He had a tremendous amount of responsibility and impact, which was a strength of his application. And his post-MBA goals were actually to launch and found his own startup, his own company that was also related to the food sector where his current employer operated. And so that was the story that he presented in his prior applications. So before he started working with me, Rohan cast a wide net. I would never recommend this, but he applied to 8 MBA programs the prior year. So all of the M7s plus Michigan Ross. Unfortunately, that strategy did not pay off for him. He did end up waitlisted from one of the M7s and from Michigan Ross and was ultimately let go off the waitlist about midsummer. So he came back to us at that point and was asking for help with his reapplication strategy. So, of course, after doing a deep dive into his prior applications and diagnosing what went wrong, for him, it really wasn't his test score. His CGPA was a tad on the low side. Again, his test score made up for it. So that was not the issue. It really did come down to his story and his essays and his career goals and all of the other more qualitative and subjective components of his application. His career goals lacked a logical progression. So I mentioned above, he wanted to launch his own food-related or food industry-related startup, but he said that his short-term goal was to go work in management consulting. And no offense to management consulting, it is an amazing post-MBA, landing pad. It's a tremendous opportunity to learn about corporate strategy and develop analytical skills and work in a very rigorous and intellectually stimulating environment. But it does not make sense as the next place you would go to learn about entrepreneurship, especially after Rohan had already been working in startups. And so after speaking to him, he admitted to me that he really just put consulting in his post-MBA goals because he was worried that those were really the only firms that would sponsor visas in the US. And so he just put it there because he felt like he had to, not because that was truly what he wanted to target. So that was red flag number one. His essays used a lot of jargon, right? I mentioned he's in a supply chain and operations role. So there was a lot of industry terminology and systems and just a lot of data and results that were put out there without a lot of storytelling and without a lot of explanation of how he brought these things about. So again, the essays were just very hard to read for an audience that wasn't immersed in his world every single day. And lastly, Rohan had a very good insight that he needed to not just bring professional expertise, but also a personal perspective to his applications. And so he did write about a truly and deeply personal experience in some of his essays. He wrote about, a disability that he'd experienced growing up, and sort of where he fell short was not the insight to get personal, that was spot on, but it was how he conveyed that, right? The sort of the discussion of his experience read more like a, hey, FYI, I went through this, as opposed to really connecting the dots between how he came out stronger from the other side and has been able to use that experience to be a better leader, to contribute better to his community, and obviously looking forward to contribute something unique to an MBA community. So again, that was a tremendous low-hanging fruit that we saw for Rohan to improve upon in his reapplications. So what was his reapplication strategy? He did not retake the GMAT. He asked me if he should, and I said, absolutely not. Even if you get a 760 or a 770, it's not going to boost your chances meaningfully. You've already checked the box in the GMAT department. But we did change and refine and, of course, explain, which is what I mentioned earlier. When you change something from your prior application, you need to explain it. We changed his career goals. And we changed his short-term goal, not his long-term goal. His long-term goal stood firm, and he had a lot of conviction in that. But his short-term goal was to pivot into product management, because technology was a really core part of the idea, the concept he had for his startup in the future, and that was experience that he currently lacked. And so that was a nice way to create a connection between his past experience, his future goals, and a role that made sense for him, but also made sense for the MBA. And the other thing we did around his career goals is really just bring in more of a personal why behind them. Instead of really building a business case for why this concept makes sense and there's a need for it, we talked some about why this was something that he was motivated to put his career behind and the problem that he was motivated to solve. We did a lot of work around leaning into his leadership experience, right? Moving away from that jargon and such a strong emphasis on numerical results. Those matter, but ultimately what the AdCom is really going to sort of sink their teeth into is the how, right? How did he bring those results about? How did he rally a team? How did he save his team from almost getting laid off? Yes, that happened. And so being able to use those stories in his application just added so much dimension to his story that wasn't existing there last time. The personal narrative we talked about, we kept that in. It was so core it is so core to who he is. It couldn't be left out of an application, but we helped him reframe that experience to come from a place of strength, a place of resilience, and a place of really helping the reader understand how that experience will then lend itself into a positive contribution in an MBA community. Lastly, we narrowed his choice of schools. I was not going to let him reapply to all 7 M7s again. It's not a good use of time, and it's just impossible to do all those applications justice. So we narrowed it down to 3 schools that were his top choice. And ultimately, he was accepted to Kellogg. He made it to the interview phase at Stanford and was waitlisted at Stanford as well, but was accepted at Kellogg and ended up matriculating at Kellogg. So I hope these case studies really gave you some real life insights into how reapplications can be strengthened But it does come down to more than just retaking a GMAT or bringing, one additional factor to the application process. It really is a holistic reevaluation of how you can come back stronger on the other side. So I want to leave you with a quote: rejection is redirection. So use that redirection to build a stronger and more compelling application. And lastly, if you want to chat with us, if you anything that you had questions about around this presentation today, please reach out through the link on this page. It's also in the description to the event today. And I want to turn it over to answering a few of your questions now. I hope you've been dropping them into the chat. I have not been monitoring them. So let me just go back up to the top, and I'll try to get to as many of these as I possibly can. The next question is around what kind of courses are you referring to? So I'm assuming that this one is referring to the additional courses that you can take to help offset sort of a mediocre undergrad GPA or possibly a lack of quantitative coursework during undergrad. So, I'm not affiliated with any of these organizations. I am just going to tell you a few that our clients have taken with success. So on the high end of commitment in terms of time, in terms of budget, and in terms of effort, you're going to have the HBS Online Core program. So Core stands for Certificate of Readiness. And it's essentially like a mini MBA online that is taught using HBS's notorious case method. And so you commit to a specific time frame. I believe they range around 17 weeks. You'll go through modules, and essentially it gives you a crash course on the materials and the subjects that you'll need to be prepared to study and to excel in business school. So that's one. In the middle sort of range of commitment, you have actually just taking a college course. Our clients have often found UC Berkeley's extension catalog to have a lot of offerings. Math for Management is a really popular one. This is all taken online. So there's a minimum amount of time that you have to take to complete it, but it's completely flexible. All the modules are completed online. Homework and tests and quizzes are done online as well, but they are graded by a real professor. And you do get a real grade and transcript at the end that you can then submit to MBA programs. And on the lowest end of commitment, you have MBA Math. So MBA Math is literally mbamath.com. And it is a sort of crash course in all of the relevant quantitative subjects that you'll need for business school. It's pretty short and sweet. It's on the low end of budget. You can usually bang it out in a weekend or two. And at the end, you'll get a certificate that says that you achieved, all of your modules at 100% accuracy or something like that. Hope that's helpful. So the next question is, how do you show a cohesive narrative if you've had multiple jobs in different industries? Great question. That is really where the magic of storytelling comes in, right? And cohesion is often sort of not clear when you're going through the steps, right? It only becomes clear in retrospect, where you can understand, okay, what drove me to make this pivot? Or what drove me to make this switch from one job to the next? How did I use the skills from my prior role to excel, I should say, in my new role, right? Or what insights did that give me that then led me to take this next step that then put me on this new journey, right? So the cause and effect is really what you want to show. And you want to really think sort of creatively about what are some of the, let's call it, common denominators across all of the steps that you've taken that were maybe behind your motivation, or that was also sort of the drive or the strength that you have that is also pushing you towards and inspiring your post-MBA goals. So without knowing more specifics or details about your sort of particular industries and jobs, it's difficult for me to give you more specific insights than that. But I can tell you that even if things seem completely disparate on paper, there is a way to make them all make sense and seem cohesive with the right amount of storytelling and, of course, self-reflection and honesty about why you took each step. Hope that's helpful. All right, so the next question is it advisable to reapply in round one if you applied in round 2 with your GMAT as the barrier. So I think my first question to that would be, are you sure that the GMAT was the only barrier? And I don't know the answer to that, but just make sure that you are confident in your answer. If everything else checked out, you kind of were applying at the sweet spot in your career, your extracurriculars were on fire, right? You had excellent recommendations, the whole thing, and it was just your GMAT score, then you could reapply in round 1 with a better GMAT score, right? As long as you actually have the runway that you need in order to retake the test and do a lot better. I would say if you're not able to achieve a better score, I wouldn't push a reapplication in round 1 just to get that sort of very negligible round 1 advantage. I would make sure that you apply when you have a stronger score to add to your application, and to have that be the new factor that helps them in making the decision. All right. So the next question is a career gap all right? And then how do we explain it? If you're working on the GRE and getting a new job at the same time, is that a red flag? So let me address the first question, right? Is a career gap all right? Yes, the short answer is yes, it is all right, but you 100% need to explain it. You cannot have a career gap and not have a story, because one of my sort of famous takeaways from a conversation that I had a few years ago with a former AdCom on my team is that the admissions committee is not allowed to give you the benefit of the doubt, right? And so if you don't explain it, they de facto have to jump to the worst possible conclusions. So you absolutely want to explain it. That said, I would also encourage you to do everything you can, and I'm sure you are, to minimize that career gap and to be productive during that time. And so, really, if that gap is more than 3 months long or so, hopefully you're filling your time with extracurriculars that are meaningful to you, or maybe you're, getting involved in your family business or a local nonprofit, right, that you can kind of lend a hand to in a specific way that's relevant to your skills. So again, you want to do something with the time, and you also, want to, again, explain the career gap, the reasons for it, and then, of course, ultimately apply once you've landed a new role. If you're working on the GRE and getting a new job at the same time, that's fine. Studying for the GRE is time consuming, but please don't let that hold you back from finding a new job. There's never any excuse for quitting your job to study for the GMAT. And so really you want to make sure that you are able to recruit and give that process everything you've got. And then of course, study for the GMAT, get that great score, and then you'll be in great shape to apply for round 1. Last question, and I know we're just about at time, so I'm going to quickly answer this. If I have 11 years of experience, would you still advise attempting to get an MBA? So my answer to this question would be yes. If an MBA is something that you are committed to doing and have realized it is an essential and important and valuable addition to your career path, you should absolutely attempt to do it. That said, most likely, and not always, but most likely, an M7 program in the US is going to be off the table. And really a top 10 program in most cases will be off the table, unless again, there's extenuating circumstances in play. So I would say broaden your horizons, look at European MBA programs. They tend to have a broader range of years of experience, or look at executive MBA programs, which were created exactly for folks in your situation. Folks who are at later stages in their career, have typically already reached managerial levels, and they're looking to sort of have elevated classroom discussions and tackle the curriculum from a richer depth of perspective that comes with having 11 years of experience versus 3. Hope that's helpful. And I think that's all that we have for today. Thank you so much for your amazing questions. And thank you everyone for watching the session. If there's anything else that I can be helpful with, you have my contact information here on the screen. And you can also request a consultation with us through the link in the show description. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.